So we're now in part two of Just and Unjust Wars, and we are in the first chapter of part two, which is chapter four. And this one is Law and Order in International Society, and part two is going to be developing this theory of aggression. So the aggression is at the basis of Walzer's thinking about war, right? Aggression, the main thing about aggression is it foists, a choice upon foists a choice upon some people by other people, namely that the latter are faced with the choice of, or not much of a choice. They got to fight, right? So they're under this threat. And that's basically the whole idea of aggression, right? Is that you're forcing some group is forcing another group to fight, whether or not they want to. Um, and again, he's also keep that in mind. Along with that is that there is a moral equivalency of all those that are actually in the fight, as opposed to those who have imposed the fight. There's not a moral equivalency on those that have imposed and those haven't imposed on them. Not a moral equivalency there, but those that are actually in the fight, there's a moral equivalency. All right, so chapter four, Law and Order in International Society. These chapters are just getting, in my view, more interesting as he starts digging deeper into the whole idea of how he thinks about war, and more complicated. So the first part one, in my view of this book, is kind of laying out, sketching out, putting down the skeleton. Now he's putting some meat on the bones, and so there's a lot more content, a lot more discussion, very interesting. But nonetheless, I can't go line through the book, but so I'm going to stay more at the kind of the skeletal level. So what's basically going on in this chapter? So Law and Order in International Society, he's developing a little bit more of this notion of aggression. Remember, and now he's talking about aggression amongst individuals. When we think about the concept, when we conceptualize aggression, we conceptualize it in different ways. And different ways how? And sometimes we differentiate it and sometimes we don't. What does that mean? Well, when we think about aggression among individuals, we think about it as a differentiated concept. We just do that. And what does that mean? Well, there's various levels of aggression, right? You can be aggressive towards other people in a variety of ways. And we use this. And just think about everyday speech. You can say you go home after work and you say to a friend or a partner or whatever, "Holy cow, was one of my colleagues aggressive with me today?" And the answer, usually the response will be, well, in what way were they aggressive? In implying that there are various ways a person could be aggressive. It could be, well, when I gave a talk or something, or said something at a meeting, they really scoffed at it and said it was ridiculous what I was saying, and so that might be sort of interpreted as aggressor. Then there could be more active forms of aggression amongst individuals, like that would be like people who are physically aggressive, emotionally aggressive. So the whole thing is that you can say aggressive in what way? We do that in everyday language, and the law reflects that as well, right? You think about when people do break the law, they're committing acts of aggression, and there are different consequences and different categories. So depending, how aggressive it was, if it was, a threat, or if they took, really did some bodily harm or whatnot, you have different ways of measuring that in the law, and different way, and accordingly, different punishments. Also, if there are certain acts of aggression and the victim of them does certain things, that will also change how the law understands it. So, for instance, as Walzer points out, like he draws a nice contrast with how states and individuals respond to aggression. It doesn't really matter what the state does, but it does matter with individuals. For instance, if one individual wants to rob another individual, and in the first case, the robbery takes place without any response, right? The individual just hands money over. That will be viewed as one kind of aggression, or one level of it, and then have a corresponding criminal, designation. But if the victim doesn't doesn't hand over, but there's some kind of struggle, and then there's an injury, well, the aggression is regarded as more serious, and even though that the net effect might have been simply the taking of a purse or a wallet, it's regarded differently in the law. Walzer says that doesn't really apply on the international level. So even though there are similarities between aggression amongst individuals and states, there are differences. Okay, so the key thing is that it's differentiated among individuals. And just again, look at the laws. We reflect that reflects our thinking in many ways. So we accept differentiation here, but among states, it's largely undifferentiated, right? Aggression is aggression is aggression. We don't say, oh, one state was aggressive. How? Right? We could. I mean, we can do that. We can unpack it. But normally we just reject the notion of a differentiation of aggression. So it would be, if you can think of it this way, and some philosophers do argue this. Do we want to make a distinction, like between an aggressive act of, let's say, one state against the other? And in the first case, they want to take something large and major versus a smaller piece. So a large amount of land versus a smaller amount of land. Do we want to make a distinction between that? We generally, as Walzer says, we don't. That would be differentiation of aggression between states, and we don't do that. So we reject the notion of differentiation here. It's not that it's unintelligible. It's not that that it's absolutely intuitively obvious that you can't differentiate the concept of aggression when applied, when your domain of application is international relations. Sure, you could do it, and some people do argue for it. But Walzer's saying that's generally, how we think about aggression. We don't tend to think of it that way. We tend to think that when one state is aggressive to another state, aggression is aggression. Whether they're taking a little piece of land or a big chunk of it, we don't really distinguish. It's an act of aggression. So it's a monolithic approach to the concept of aggression on the interstate level. But we don't take that approach in our laws. Some legal systems are closer to taking, single kinds of approaches towards aggression. And that's how you can sometimes get criticisms of, the same punishment for what we might intuitively think are more minor acts versus major ones. Okay, now why? Okay, so given that we happen to think about aggression as undifferentiated on the state level, or on the interstate level, we tend to think of it as undifferentiated or apply it that way. That's how we happen to do it. And we think of it among individuals as differentiated. But why really is that? Well, I've alluded to a few things, in that we tend to think that individual punishments should be different for individual levels. But that's more or less just stating that there are individual levels, and I'm repeat that. Is there kind of an argument for this? Well, Walzer says in a way there is. That's probably underlying our thinking on when we differentiate and when we don't. And it goes something like this. Think about the concept of aggression. It involves, some kind of forces being used, right? Because if I wanted to get you to do something and I could convince you with language, it might not be regarded quite as an act of aggression, although it could be, depending on, if I was threatening you or whatnot. But so it might be difficult to unpack exactly how to completely articulate the notion of force. But that's central to what Walzer's after here. And that is, when we are aggressive, when states are aggressive and individuals are aggressive, they're really, it's some kind of active force. Right? As Clausewitz might say, war is an act of force to bend the enemy to one's will, right? And when we're using force to bend the will of another, when it's among individuals, says Walzer, it doesn't always put lives at risk. It can put all kinds of things at risk. There is a risk, there is endangerment, all these kinds of things. But not every act of force, which is, presupposed in an act of aggression on the individual level, is going to put a life at risk, right? So sometimes you say, yeah, that person was aggressive. And if I say, well, was your actual life at risk? Well, no, but they were aggressive to me. Okay, so if that kind of Walzerian type of reasoning can go through, think about the same question at the state level. When a state is aggressive to another one, it's using an act that involves force. When states do that to each other, when states have force involved on each other, can you say the same, that there's no endangerment of lives? And Walzer says basically no. That's why there's a difference here. That when you really think about it, when states are involved and they're scuffling and one is being aggressive to the other, it's a different ontological level, as philosophers might say, or a different sociological level, but it's a different level. This is Walzer's main thing. This is how we think about it. Is it truly metaphysically different? You know, like I used the word ontological. Is it really Walzer doesn't dig into that. He doesn't seem to care about it, but we tend to think that it is. And so when force is used among states, it's pretty well always put lives at risk, right? You really don't have one state using force to manipulate or bend another state in some direction without being able to say, look, once you start doing that, you're putting lives at risk. The stakes are way higher, right? And they're fundamentally different because now people are going to not just get hurt, but we're talking about endangering lives. Okay. And so another thing is that when force is carried out, aggression force is carried out, you're putting lives at risk and you're challenging, very basic rights. As Walzer says, these are rights that are worth dying for, right? So that's the level. So not every act of force amongst individuals puts lives at risk. Not every act of force amongst individuals threatens lives that are rights that are worth dying for. You know, sometimes you might say, well, that's an overstatement. You know, if every aggressive interaction between individuals, does it really threaten a right that's worth dying over? It might even threaten a right, but is it necessarily a right worth dying over? Well, Walzer says no. But on the state level, yes. And what are we talking about here? Well, these are certain rights that are analogous to rights that we have at the domestic level. And I'll talk a little bit about that because now I'm bringing in what Walzer calls picks up on what's called the domestic analogy. So hang on for that. So what rights are being threatened here? Well, among states, the rights that are being threatened, and these are like rights worth dying for, is kind of like states' rights, like territorial integrity, political sovereignty. That's what's being threatened under acts of aggression. When states are imposing on each other, when they're committing acts of aggression and force and all that stuff is involved, what's happening is one state is threatening the territorial and political sovereignty of another state. And that is something that Walzer says is worth dying over. Now, you may disagree, or you may agree, whatever. But he's making these links between these concepts, of the states having certain kinds of rights, and these would be rights that are worth dying over. However, these rights don't just fall out of heaven or anything. These are rights of states, but they ultimately, and I underline the word derive, and perhaps I could even do a little quotation marks, because that process of derivation is a complicated one, and it's full of controversy, but ultimately he thinks that it does come up from the individuals. But overall, what are states really supposed to do? When you think about a state as some kind of instrument of protection, what is it supposed to do as this protection? Like, what is it supposed to guard? We sometimes hear of sort of the state as a kind of watchman or whatever. But states really, as Walzer says, they protect this kind of common life. You could call it culture or whatever, but this kind of common life that all the people will share. It's not necessarily even political, because there might be a common life that doesn't have a particular political affiliation. And so sometimes, as he said, a king might actually have a group of people and they have a certain common life and he wants to just sort of annex it or take it. And he might not even be within his right to do that, even if it's part of supposedly his territory, because he could be violating this common life of the individuals. And so you can look at a couple of Walzer's historical examples of pieces of land that have gone back and forth where different states have wanted them. And ultimately, Walzer starts talking about, well, what's the common life there and what did people say? And that is kind of a democratic notion. But states ultimately are to protect this common life. All right, but he goes into a lot more detail. So have a look in that, and some talk of how it derives, and that's always an interesting one. All right, so the second main idea in chapter 4 of part 2 is this legalist paradigm. And as I mentioned, an analogy between the international situation and the domestic situation. Now, important thing about analogies. First, analogies are not arguments, right? So that if you draw an analogy between two things, that's not an argument at all. That's just noticing comparisons. And that's all basically you're doing is noticing similarities and differences. So when you say A is analogous to B, all you're saying is that A is like B regarding something, whatever it happens to be, and A is unlike B regarding something else, right? You know, as people say, you can't compare apples and oranges. Yes, you can, because they're both spheres, but they taste different. So they're similar apples and oranges, I guess, roughly we could say for the sake of illustration. They're analogous in the sense that they're with respect to geometry, right? They're both solid geometric objects. They're spheres, right? Not perfect spheres. Neither of them is a perfect sphere. So apples and oranges are analogous in that sense. But they're different. You know, they're unlike. Apples and oranges are unlike with respect to, say, taste or something like that. So they're similar and different. That's the whole notion of an analogy. And keep in mind that can anything be analogous to anything? Sure. Yeah. If books and oranges, you could figure out some kind of analogy of how books are like oranges and how books are unlike oranges. Probably easier to figure out how they're unlike than they're like. I mean, both are nutritious, but I'm using nutritious in an analogical sense. Because nutritious for the mind, books are nutritious for the mind, and orange is nutritious for the body, something like that. So why do we make analogies? Well, because they're useful. They help us to understand. Analogies really are, shall we say, tools for understanding. And so it tends to be easier to understand the domestic situation than the international one. Okay, all that out of the way. I just drew these squiggly lines here. The international situation is analogous to the domestic one. Well, domestically we negotiate a lot with each other. We get along through negotiations and we make little deals and contracts and all that stuff. Well, that happens on the international situation. Countries, states, I should probably stick to the term state. States negotiate with each other. They cut deals, right? They cut trade deals, extradition deals, all kinds of things. They negotiate, they kind of argue, they chit chat, and eventually they sign a document, a contract, and whatnot. And then they get mad at each other when somebody is accused of reneging. They have dispute mechanisms, settlement mechanisms, and all that kind of very similar, analogous to what happens at the domestic situation. But again, as we've seen, the domestic situation does have a very differentiated concept of aggression. You don't really have that at the international situation. You don't have police really at that level. You have some organizations, but you really don't have a full-on police system and a court. Yes, we have an international court, but unlike in a state where, everybody, you don't sign on to the Supreme Court in your country. It's there, right? You can't just say, well, I'm not going to listen to the Supreme Court of Canada. I haven't signed on. Well, good luck doing that. Or good luck if you're an American saying, I don't recognize the Supreme Court. You can say it, but you're still going to be governed by it. But in the international arena, there really isn't a court like that, because some countries have recognized the International Criminal Court and some haven't, right? They just don't recognize it. So it doesn't really apply to them. So it's a different view. Hobbes liked to say that in the international situation, states were poised like gladiators, staring at each other. And there's really not too many rules, right? And the rest of us just kind of sit and watch. So in that sense, there's an analogy. So from this domestic analogy, and Walzer does include, if you're interested as a footnote, some people that challenge this. But this is fundamental to his understanding of of aggression, war, and a lot of things. So at least he's giving you, shall we say, the premises of his argument, the foundations of his argument. So you can go and check up on it, and maybe you don't want to use this domestic analogy. And we'll see that, some people do challenge it. And again, some people do challenge this notion of whether or not we should have an undifferentiated notion of aggression at the international level. Okay, but back to Walzer. So from this sort of thinking about this domestic analogy, two presuppositions really follow. That from aggression and when fighting starts, really military action isn't a pretty well the appropriate response. If somebody's trying to take land and all this stuff, military action is totally an appropriate response. And also, when this fighting starts, somebody's responsible, right? There's no such thing as a war that's just on both sides, right? When we do say a just war, what we're always saying is that one side is just, at most, right? Not at least. Why? Because there are totally unjust wars. Both are bad sides. Let's say two major powers fight a war over some third smaller state, right? So two empires want to take over this little tiny country, and the country's not thrilled about either of these, and so there's a war going on between two major states to see, and the spoils of that war will be the conquest of a little state. Well, that would be a fully unjustified war. Right? And the medieval theologians, and as Walzer says, we're right. There's no such thing as a war that's just on both sides. So at that level, Walzer is, fairly traditional in his thinking about morality, in the sense that, if you have that kind of a conflict, somebody's right, somebody's wrong, or both are wrong. Morality is not really deeply ambiguous, as some philosophers have argued, where you could have a situation where both are right and there's conflict. So morality, that's actually a fairly deep presupposition by Walzer, along with the medieval theologians, but they grounded that presupposition in a kind of divine law, right? A natural law that says, in the end, there are right answers. You may not know them, but there are right solutions and singular solutions to moral problems. Like, you can get a correct answer. But when Walzer's, saying it, he doesn't have that medieval apparatus, but he's following along and enjoying the fruits of medieval labors by saying that there are totally unjust wars. Both are bad sides, but there's no just war in the sense that both sides are just. Okay, so as I think you can see, there's a lot of stuff going on in this chapter. Things are the Walzerian engine is firing up, indeed. So the theory of aggression with TOA, the theory of aggression, he then says, look, you can sum it up, and he sums it up in six of these propositions, okay? And it's about remember the theory of aggression is talking about the international situation. First, that there's an international society of independent states. I'm reading from page 61 on my 4th edition. The international society has a law that establishes rights of its members. Above all, the rights of territorial integrity and political sovereignty. So that's enshrined in this legalist paradigm. Use of force or imminent threat of force by one state against the political sovereignty or territorial integrity of another is aggression and is a criminal act. Number 4, aggression justifies two kinds of violent response, right? So when a state commits it, right, military action is justified in response. A war of self-defense by the victim, and a war of law enforcement by the victim and any other member of international society. So if your neighbor is under attack and is a victim of aggression, you can pitch in. And nothing but, number 5 is a good one, nothing but aggression justifies war. You can't justify it on basis like honor and all that, or, lots of times in the past there were all kinds of things that kings and princes used to justify going to war. And Walzer is saying you can't use any of that. The only thing that can justify going to war is that you're a victim of aggression, right? It's not that you can't use aggression to justify war. Like you can't be aggressive and use that. No, you're the victim of aggression. And the central purpose is to limit the occasions for war. All right, and namely, and he borrows, and this is nothing new. Like Vittoria, a great thinker from hundreds of years ago, said in the end, there's really only one justification. Despite what all the kings of his time said, is that namely a wrong received. You've been wronged, right? Walzer says, what is it to be wrong? You're a victim of aggression. Your political sovereignty has been violated. Your territorial sovereignty has been violated. It is a threat to your common way of life from some kind of external agent. Uh, Number 6, once the aggressor state has been militarily repulsed, it can also be punished, right? So it's not simply that to give aggressors a thing like, well, give it a shot, we'll just shove you out, and that's it, that's where it will end. No, this theory of aggression also says that if you do that and you are pushed out, you can rightly be punished for your actions. All right. So there you go. And these all presupposing this domestic analogy where there are similarities and differences, all of that in the end constitute those 6 propositions are this what he calls this legalist paradigm. That's not the end of the story. This is sort of, as he says, the first kind of version of the theory of aggression will be under this legalist paradigm. But rest assured, there's a lot more in this chapter that develops these ideas. So have a look at that. And rest assured, there's a lot more coming in the book that's going to further flesh all this out to give us a more full-blooded view of what Walzer really thinks about aggression and war. See you next video.